Okay, so this is our great pleasure to welcome Federico Boem in this PhilinBioMed seminar series. Federico is a philosopher of science with a special focus on different issues in general philosophy of science and also in philosophy of biology and philosophy of medicine. And Federico has done some super interesting work in different domains. You probably know that Federico was trained in Milan, and since then he went to different places from Florence to Turin to Milan again, and Federico did very interesting work on many different questions, including the microbiota. And recently he's been very interested in the gut-brain microbiota axis. He has worked with different scientists, including the excellent Amedeo Amedei, who is, I think, in Florence, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And this is really a great pleasure for us to have Federico today, not only because his work is super interesting and super relevant, but also because we had, some of us, the pleasure to spend some time with Federico, especially in Biarritz, at our summer school in July 2018, if I remember correctly. That was a great moment, and Federico was a fantastic participant. So this is all the more a nice moment for us, and I'm still admitting people in this meeting. So this is really great to see so many participants, which proves once again that there's a very strong interest for the kind of topics that Federico is going to tell us about. You probably remember that next time we will have Antoine Dussault, and the one after next we'll have our next seminar about, I forgot who was first, if it's in, okay, so just check on the website. So yes, it's Jean Tabery in December, and Emanuele Ratti later in the spring. So this is really our great pleasure to have today Federico. And Federico, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for this kind introduction. I mean, I also remember very well the summer school we had last year, and actually part of the debate that time helped me and my colleagues to write this paper. So I want to start with let's say a methodological caveat. Let's say this is a working hypothesis, and of course, I mean, I know, and I will talk about that some of the empirical evidence is disputed, but I mean, in my view, this doesn't change the robustness of the argument. It might change the end of the argument, but it doesn't sound how the argument is structured. I hope I will convince you that it is so. So basically, the empirical premise, sorry, I just need to move the image. Okay. So an increasing number of evidence shows the presence of functional interactions between cognitive activities and the status of the microbiota population in agent's gut. This interaction might occur due to the interactions among microbiota, the gut, and the brain. And the most famous of these kind of interaction is the so-called microbiota gut-brain axis, or MGBA. And I put an asterisk because I know that, I mean, these axes need some words more to be spelled out, and I will do that later. So, sorry. So this talk in a nutshell is basically running through these three theses. The first one is that microbiota can be seen as a functional part of our cognitive system. And the second claim is that the cognitive system extends out of the skull through the microbiota gut-brain axis. So today's menu is as follows. I will briefly present what is the externally extended cognition thesis, and what we call the internally extended cognition thesis. Then I'll present some evidence showing that the microbiota is somehow involved in cognitive functions. And then I try to persuade you that agent's body and gut microbiota are not two different biological entities, but parts of the same biological individual. And cognition internally extends to the activity of gut microbiota through the microbiota gut-brain axis, but not just through that. So what is the extended cognition thesis? This is a famous paper in 1998 by Clark and Chalmers, claiming that cognition is not always and necessarily segregated to individual brains. So what do they mean? Well, this is based on two main assumptions. The first one is functionalism. And in Clark and Chalmers' words, this means that what makes something part of a cognitive process does not depend on its internal constitution, but on the causal role it plays in the system of which is a part. And the second assumption is what they call the parity principle, meaning that if, while performing a task, a part of the word functions as a process that, if done in the head, we would not hesitate to recognize as a part of the cognitive process, then that part of the word is part of the cognitive process. So the traditional version of the extended cognition thesis that we call externally extended cognition thesis is, and the original one, is that the cognitive processes extend outside the agent's head and body, involving objects and events in the physical environment. This means that, according to Clark and Chalmers, famously, your smartphone, your laptop, some artificial devices can be legitimately seen as part of your cognitive system. While our account, that we call internally extended cognition thesis, claims that the vehicles of our cognitive processes extend, allow me, out of our heads, but do not exceed the boundaries of our body. And I hope I will explain you better why I put these two propositions in brackets. So we envisage three main problems with the external extended cognition thesis. The first one is the problem of constancy. Because if you extend cognition to parts of the environment in an arbitrary way, this makes the attribution of cognitive properties dependent on highly unstable contextual circumstances. So think about your smartphone. If you lose your smartphone, of course you might lose, according to the thesis, part of your memory, but many people would claim that you still lost something that it's not exactly part of your cognitive system, right? So there are elements of counterintuitiveness in this. The second problem is the problem of personal identity. So extended individual cognitive processes out of agent's skull involves an unwanted or peculiar scattering of agent's identity, right? I think think about the example of the smartphone. This is pretty evident. And then the problem of information. Cognition is usually associated with natural vehicles of information, but many objects in the environment are not vehicles of this type. Of course, there are many other objections to the external extended cognition thesis, but here I try to sum up the most relevant ones. So the extended cognition thesis is the view according to which cognition extends outside the boundaries of the skull. There are two, let's say, versions of extended cognition thesis. One is the traditional one, and one is what we call the internal cognition, extended cognition thesis. And I try to persuade you that the traditional version suffers from critical problems. Why do we prefer the internal extended cognition thesis? Well, first, because from an extensional point of view, our individual identity coincides with the extension of our body, let's say so. And I mean, in respect to the traditional version. Then this version preserve what cognitive scientists sometimes call cognitive identity. So the fact that our cognitive system is part of our extensional identity. Then there is the part relation. Our cognitive system is an extensional part of our body. So from 1 and 2. And the fourth one is what the literature calls body identity primacy. So we should not be willing to consider something as part of a cognitive system if we are not willing to consider it as part of our body. So our thesis is that cognition internally extends outside the extension of agent skull through the microbiota's activity. And this amounts to an internal extension of cognition. And this account, in our view, does not suffer from the issues of the external one. So why this internal perspective is different according to us? Well, first of all, because this perspective depends on the view according to which we conceive the body. So let's say the physical boundaries of a biological individual. One of our central tenets is that we should expand, either extend or revise our understanding of notions such as organism and biological individual. And I mean, I don't want to go too much into that, but I mean, and I know very well that in the audience there are people that are, you know, more expert than me in these problems. But I mean, setting the criteria of individuality in biology can be hard. Consider, for example, the case of the gall-wasp relationship, in which a particular type of wasp is able to manipulate the genome of the oak and to alter the phenotype. Okay, or other examples involve a class of fishes in which sexual mating becomes a form of parasitism. And so on that image, you see a female with some males attached to her that are no longer, let's say, individuals, but they're now part of her. So this is very general in biology, but I mean, and I mean, everybody knows Thomas' work. The problem of biological individuality is a huge problem. There is, you know, hundreds of paper on the topic, and here just recalled two very recent papers by Thomas discussing what does it mean to be individual and what scientific disciplines dealt with the problem of individuality. And just to remind, there is also the famous position by Scott Gilbert, who reminded us that probably there are some aspects in the history of life that we mistakenly called individuals, but actually they were not. So one particular case challenging the notion of individuality as traditionally perceived is the notion of symbiosis. I will be very brief and very fast on this because I assume that the audience knows this stuff very well. So we know that symbiosis refers to several kinds of living associations between members of different species. There are different kinds of associations, and the members of these associations are called symbionts. The host-microbiota relationship is a type of symbiosis. And microbiota, again, this is, let's say, the mainstream received view, usually designates the ecological community of specific microorganisms, at the beginning just bacteria, but now the research field is expanding and started to include also viruses and fungi found in a given microenvironment, for example, the gut. They can be either commensals or pathogenic, and I mean, I don't want to recall many literature on that, but for example, bear in mind that being pathogenic, for example, doesn't mean necessarily that this property belongs to certain organism as such, but could be relational, so and context dependent. And also traditionally, normally microbiome is the collection of the genomes from all the microorganisms belonging to a microbiota. And the diversity in microbiomes between individuals can be huge. And even within the same person through time, there can be a variation in the microbiome constitution and composition. Microbiota in the gut are not just recently, but I mean, now the research is going on since years, at the center of a very serious investigation that has shown that the microbiota plays a functional role in many physiological functions that normally we attribute to the host, such as digestion, metabolism, inflammation, immune response and tolerance, etc., etc. And we are aware that problems with microbiota may lead to disturbed or impeded physiological functions. Some people label these problems collectively as dysbiosis. Some researchers have pointed out that this is a misleading term or too general or too vague. But so let's say for the moment that there might be disruption in the way the microbiota is organized that can cause serious problem to the health of what we call the human being. And this is object of investigation of many different disciplines, and opened also new areas of research, such as, for example, microbial endocrinology. Famously, the microbiota is important in relation to the immune system. And here I envisage, again, a functionalist approach to microbiota and the immune system. This is the famous review by Belcade and Hand, 2014, when they claim that microbiota plays a fundamental role on the induction, training, and function of the host immune system. And they also highlight very well that the immune system has largely evolved as a means to maintain this symbiotic relationship. And so we can have basically elements to claim that there is a co-evolution between the host and its microorganisms. In a publication 2 years ago, starting from reflections that Thomas made on immunology and individuality, we claimed with Amedeo Amedei that microbiota can be seen as a functional part of the immune system. Again, you know, the functionalist perspective I explained to you at the beginning. And since the immune system is central to understand our individuality, we claim that microbiota being part of the immune system then could be part of our individuality. And just to mention, this is not just a philosophical speculation. There are people in science claiming for a new vision of immunity. This is also, I mean, a quite old paper. I think it's 2011, if I recall correctly. And also scientists are trying, to broaden the boundaries of the immune system of the organisms as such. And I mean, everybody who was at the summer school last year, I think recalls very well the marvelous lecture by Rob Knight and his tremendous work with a lot of computational analysis on microbiota's composition and functioning. And in this recent interview 2 years ago, Rob Knight claimed that basically you're more microbe than you're human. And the fact that there are many microbial genes active in what you call your body at the moment, and that the fact that we don't know very much about what they're doing implies that basically we don't know that much about our genetic constitution. So the Human Genome Project was a tremendous advancement, no doubts, but basically it's just a tiny fraction of what's going on inside us. And this perspective of functional wholes somehow has been labeled by some scientists famously as the holobiont. So the idea is that the macroscopic organisms that we call animals, plants, whatever, should not be longer considered as autonomous entities, but we should see them as biomolecular networks composed by the macroscopic part and the microscopic part. And this functional unity, it's called the holobiont. So if we embrace fully the holobiont perspective, we can see that we can claim that microscopic organisms cannot be considered individuals only by morphological, anatomical, or gene-based physiological criteria. There's something more. And so these symbionts may also constitute a further modality of biological inheritance. There's a lot of research going on, but the way, let's say, microbiome is transmitted through different species, and not just vertically, but also horizontally. And it's matter of a growing interest in empirical science. And they could provide a source of variation for natural selection and other evolutionary mechanisms. So some people even argued that we should, start a new discipline called philosymbiosis to describe the eco-evolutionary pattern, so combining ecology and evolution, in order to study the phylogeny of these units. And just by recalling the Gilbert's view, the holobiont, of course, these are not unproblematic, but the holobiont can be used as a unit of anatomy, just in terms, here I'm not talking metaphysically or ontologically, but certainly from an operative and investigative point of view, there are scientists using holobiont as units of anatomy, development, physiology, immunology, evolution, and so on. And this new framework, which is not fully settled at the moment, fostered the need for new biological disciplines and subdisciplines, such as, for example, evo-devo ecobiology. So, all things considered, with my colleagues, we had this thought. So if the functions of a new biological individuals described as such are instantiated by the whole, so the functional whole, And if, for instance, the immunological functions have been revisited in the light of this perspective, so now we can consider the functions of the entire network. And if immunologists started, maybe not all of them, but to consider the possibility that this is a real case, then why thinking of cognitive function as just human, meaning that just made possible by the human part of the holobiome and not pertaining to the functional whole? So now I will present some evidence showing that the activities might affect, and I will go back on this aspect, emotional behavior and higher cognitive processes by means of variation in the composition, so the taxa, metabolic activity, and ecological dynamics of gut microbiota. The relations between gut microbiota on the one hand and emotional and cognitive function on the other hand are made possible through multiple paths of communications. And here's a very recent paper claiming that these kind of interactions are also linked to our social behavior. So not just individual behavior, but social behavior. Of course, some caveats. I mean, I remember very well the presentation by Pierre Cosnan last year about problems in connecting microbiota's activity and cognitive functions. Of course, microbiota gut-brain axis, it's not an anatomical structure, definitely not a single one. At the moment, it's more like a functional descriptor of the entire class of possible relations that might occur between microbiota, the gut, and the brain. And sorry, and again in this very nice paper, 2019, the authors explore the magnitude of the ways according to which a microbiota, the gut, and the nervous system might interact. Where the first one is the short chain fatty acids that can, I mean, it has been shown they can influence brain physiology and behavior directly, but also indirectly influencing the signaling of various mediators in the brain. The vagus nerve has been claimed to be a very promising route through which the microbiota can communicate with the brain. Then, of course, this mediation and relationship could occur through the activity of the immune system. And for example, it has been shown that some bacterial activity promotes some neural activity through the mediation of immune cells. Microbiota's activity has been linked to olfactory pheromones, and so the behavior driven by olfactory stimulation, and bacteria have been related to other huge variety of physiological processes, such as neuroinflammation, serotonin turnover, myelination, and the secretion of the prosocial hormones. Of course, some of this, well, I will go that later. Another, for example, another recent article demonstrated the activation of sensory neurons by microbes, thus, let's say, making more realistic the hypothesis that microbes can be involved through differential engagement of the enteric nervous system in different inflammatory responses. In another studies, they were able to restore some neurological cognitive functions through the administration of probiotics. In this study, the authors reveal that the enzymatic activity of some bacteria can give rise to host modulatory compounds, suggesting a potential direct mechanism by which gut microbiota can influence host physiology, including behavior. In a very recent review, authors highlighted that although it is still at its beginning, neuroscience is moving from just focusing on the brain to the enteric nervous system, and this might lead to the fact that some of the activities occurring at the gut level might be influenced by the microbial activity. Then in another review, the authors say that while understanding and the appreciation of gut microbial impact on neurological function is nascent, so we are still at the beginning, unraveling gut microbiome brain connections holds the promise of transforming the neurosciences and revealing potentially novel etiology for psychiatric and neurodegenerative disorders. Again, another review claimed that there might be some pathways affected by the microbiomes, while others unaffected. And so that's why we need to, continue and to push these studies, because understanding where the difference occurs can give us more details about how the influence of microbiota is actually happening. And I mean, some people even call the gut microbiota your second brain. And I mean, this is not philosophy, this is science. And since many times I heard colleagues saying that philosophers should be, cautious with bold claims, I just show you this. So who uses a bolder language, scientists or philosophers? Here, there's a very recent review considering the use of microbiota manipulation to develop new brain drugs. And I mean, and they call this the psychobiome. Of course, I mean, these might be also due to communication needs, in order to promote or foster a certain kind of scientific agenda, to have more funds. I mean, we all know how science works, but I mean, words are important, and it's not just semantics, because words count for concepts. And if you start to call this kind of stuff psychobiome, it means that there is an increasing number of people that think that this is possible. Of course, this doesn't mean that this is true, but this possibility is not just a philosophical speculation. It has started to be taken seriously by scientists themselves. And here will be very brief, showing some studies that connect microbiota with specific cognitive functions, such as emotional processing. So, for example, anxiolytic-like behavior, the possibility to transfer what they call emotional phenotypes, emotional processing affected by the composition of gut microbiota. Other phenomena include memory processing. This is in rodents, but also in humans. And of course, microbiota can serve also as a new informational vehicle. So gut microbiota can be conceived as a sort of additional sense which allows an informational access to the external environment through the alteration of the bacterial communities that constitute it. Okay, so it's not replacing what we know, but it's adding new stuff. Of course, I mean, I'm perfectly aware that this might be problematic. And I mean, I'm perfectly aware that many causal mechanisms are still unknown. And many possible ways of interactions are still unknown. And so the picture we have at the moment is still very fragmented and incomplete. And that's why we should not forget to be skeptics about the hype that has been generated around microbiota's research. And I mean, very recently, so last year on biology and philosophy, there was a huge debate about the chance to make causal claims in microbial research. There is this famous paper by Lynch, Park, and O'Malley, where they conclude that given the limitations that they describe throughout the paper, it might be most productive to focus causal explanations on specific microbiome components, okay? And so not to claim that the microbiome as such, without knowing that much, is causing something, and to limit causal explanations to more proportional description of behavior rather than complex human traits such as mental health states. So, I mean, this kind of paper, of course, is somehow someone like me who is really in favor of the hypothesis I've explained to you must respond to. And I mean, it's not that easy, because somehow I think they're right in claiming that many times, and this is due also to the fact that in science, an epistemological reflection on, and also metaphysical, let's say so, on what is a cause is not very common. So it might be the case that scientists use the notion of cause not in a sharp and precise way. And this, of course, worsen the entire project. And to me, so, I mean, in recognizing this aspect, I say, well, this is true because, roughly speaking, I'm very brief here, it's true that normally in molecular biology, we have either interventionist or manipulative accounts for causation. And of course, with many studies regarding microbiota, we still lack this precision. And so this is a challenge, not just a philosophical challenge, it's an empirical challenge. If we really want to pursue this avenue, this is a challenge if we want to explain such complex phenomena such as cognitive functions in terms both of explanation, because again, you know, it's not that easy, you know, to directly link a single microbial activity to a complex phenomena, but also in terms of manipulation. So what kind of manipulations and so controlled experiment you can perform if the picture is so complex. And one possible, and again I stress possible because I mean I don't know whether it will be promising or not, but I think it is to try to compare the traditional, let's say, mainstream view on causality that we have in biology with different accounts of causation that appear to be implemented in other sciences, such as ecology, for example. And in the same issue, for example, there was this paper claiming that there is a way, maybe not convincing for anyone, but there is a way according to which communities can have a causal role. And I mean, this is more philosophical, but I mean, from the scientific point of view, a recent review went on the same direction, arguing that if we really want to understand how microbes and other microorganisms, so viruses and fungi as well, influence behavior, we cannot simply deploy the traditional methodologies. We need to focus on microbial ecology. So we need to, there is the need for a shift, which is both theoretical and empirical. And why I think this is problematic, but also stimulating. Because if we really want to, go further in this direction, both scientists and philosophers should start to ask themselves, what is an experiment in this area of investigation in order to prove something? What are the standards of a good experiment? And all this debate might end up in designing new types of experimental procedures motivated by different principles, which allow us to control and explain experimental results. For example, I think it's very difficult, but also fascinating to ask ourselves, what is to manipulate an ecological community? Think about the therapies we have now for treating some infections like Clostridium difficile. We do that by fecal transplantation. I mean, what is to manipulate an ecological community, and what is to intervene on ecological relation? Is that the same kind of intervention we used to have in molecular biology? I don't think so, but then we need to think how to deal with that, okay? Because we are at the intersection of two fields touching one with another. And so it's difficult, it's new, but fascinating as well. And one could even say that there might be a clash of styles of reasoning in the sense developed by Ian Hacking, and I think this might be the case. I have the impression that this might be the case. So there's a lot of work for empirical scientists, but I think that there will be a lot of work for philosophers of science as well. So indeed, there are scientists trying to do that. So try to experimentally manipulate ecosystems. Those scientists are ecologists. This is a very recent paper, of course, not on microbiota, but on tropical forest. But I mean, the difference in this sense is just the scale, but the microbiota gut interactions are no less complex than a tropical forest. And so if we really want to investigate and create a new area of investigation from an empirical point of view this time, we need to consider that we don't need just and to deal with different material sources. So we have different objects of investigations. So not just a single molecule or a single strain of bacteria, but let's say a community. And of course, I mean, we need tools to deal with that. But also we will face new theoretical and methodological differences. For example, what kind of models will be the most suitable ones to investigate this kind of objects? And again, what kind of math? Because in molecular biology, let's say, apart from systems biology, which is a case apart, but math is essentially, let's say, statistics. While in ecology, the mathematical repertoire is wider And so is this the case that show us that we might want to embark also new mathematical methods in a field of study which traditionally didn't have such methods, like molecular biology? I think this is this is troublesome, of course, but also again very, very interesting. And so to sum up, let's say that if we accept functionalism, if we accept parity principle, if we accept constancy, if we accept individuality in the brief way, broadened way I presented to you, and if we give a chance to the empirical evidence we have at the moment, then we can conclude the following thing. So if empirical evidence presented holds, and of course this is an ongoing process, then we have good reasons to claim that cognitive functions can be internally extended out of our skull, and these functions are still our functions, so not scattered as the traditional external cognition thesis. They're still our functions because the notion of our individuality has been expanded. And the extension is our extension because, and it's internal, because the microbiota can be seen as a constitutive part of us, a part of what once has been called just human. Of course, I want to thank you, my two co-authors, Amedeo Medei, who is an incredible source of material and debate. Of course, Thomas Prado and the group, you all for attention. And just to mention last three things, I mean, we are not the only ones proposing the use of extended cognition in biology. Here there is a very nice paper claiming that the cognition of spiders extend the boundaries of the body through something which is intrinsically still a part of the spider, so it's web. And so these authors, for example, claim that web threads and configurations are integral parts of the cognitive system. And very interesting, they claim that niche constructor structures emerge as prime candidates for extending animal cognition. Okay, so this proposal is similar, of course, to our proposal, but also very different. You know, in another way, also other two proposals are very intriguing to me. One is very recent, 2020, a very nice paper published on eLife. Claiming that ants possess both individual and collective cognition, somehow reminding me the notion of superorganism attributed to the colony, the ant colony. Okay, and so there is a lot of ongoing research on this, and I think that, in my view, for what I've seen, there might be very interesting connections between what I just presented and these approaches, although they are different. That we are not on the same pages, but there are many interesting points of contact. And last but not least. We're about to start. I mean, we had to start this before, but then COVID-19 stopped this. But we will start soon a study in a collaboration with several centers here in Italy on ALS, in order to verify the action of fecal transplantation of the immune system of patients suffering from this disease. And for the first time, in this study, also cognitive functions and alterations will be studied. And I think this might be also very interesting because for the first time we also bridge the boundaries, not just between disciplines in the theoretical sense, but also in the therapeutic sense. And I think this is very important also for ethical reasons. Okay, I think I'm done. I hope everything was clear. I'm very happy to take questions, and thanks again for your attention.
Thank you very much, Federico. That was very good. Let me perhaps stop sharing and see if I can. Yeah, I can see everyone. So if you want to ask a question, please use the participant option and raise your hand. I think it's going to be easier this way. Of course, you can also try to raise your hand on your to your video, but it's unlikely that I can see all of you together. So please do use the raise your hand option. Perhaps one first question by myself, but because I don't think that people will immediately have questions. I'm sure that we'll have questions in a few seconds. So one question, which is very classic, as you know, Federico, with regards to Clark and Chalmers, is the difference between function and constitution. So for example, there is this idea that it's not because I am a functional unit with my cell phone that the cell phone is constitutive of me. So this is an old objection to these people. And I just want to see to what extent you think this is a good objection, and to what extent you think it changes your views about the possibility for the microbiota to be part of my cognitive unit, so to speak.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is very interesting. I think that, okay, the first part is, let's say, intuition, let's say so. So intuitively, even if the possibility that something like this is, let's say, contributes to my cognitive functions, somehow clashes to the, let's say, intuition that this is not part of me in a strong sense, okay? So I think that even if I think that functionalism is, so they're right in the functional claim, I think that if you allow any function, so if you take functionalism in, let's say, in a too radical way, the number of counterintuitive objections will rise up till the point of having things that are, let's say, theoretical possibilities, but very unlikely to be, you know, also, let's say, sustained through space and time. While I think that functional extensionalism within, let's say, the realm of biology, so extending, let's say, the genomic-centered view of what organisms are, is a good compromise between, let's say, total functionalism and structure. I hope I answered what you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we have a series of excellent participants who are also going to be excellent people asking excellent questions, I'm sure. So we start with Gérard Rebel from the Pasteur Institute, who was quoted in your talk at some point.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation and quite complete review of the field. So I have to apologize first. I'm not a philosopher, so my questions might have the wrong wording, as Thomas often told me, but I'll try to do my best. I have two questions. One is the definition of cognition, because you know, it occurred to me that basically all you described in terms of the microbe gut to brain is basically talking about the sensory arm of the nervous system. You know, the vagus nerve and many other modalities of the central nervous system extend to the periphery, and all they do is to collect information. And you can extend this notion of sensing also from the periphery, from the gut, from the microbiota, for example, doing short-chain fatty acid, going into the brain or in some structures from the brain, like endothelial cells, they will sense and pass information. So if you see that just as a collection and transfer information, if you call that cognition, it's not, I don't see any difference with the collection of information, say, by dendritic cells in the immune system and transferring this information to T cells. So what do you mean by cognition? Because if it's too vague, then you can include anything.
Thank you very much. Okay, first of all, I mean, I'm not a philosopher of mind or cognition, so let's say I try to answer to you. I mean, what you say, it's very interesting. First of all, maybe I should specify this. By claiming that microbiota can be connected to cognitive functions, I didn't mean to say that microbiota is responsible for all possible cognitive functions. This is something also, I mean, that empirical research will hopefully reveal in the next years. And second, the point is that you're right, but this depends also, in my view, on the fact that many cognitive science is still based on representational accounts of cognition, while if you embrace, for example, embodied cognition, and the fact that, I mean, and I'm not, again, an expert on this field, but if you embrace this paradigm and the fact that many sensory and motor activities are constitutive of cognition as such, so because they are, let's say, bodily, that might explain why, for me, it's not that difficult to believe that that activity could be considered cognition. Then, of course, for example, one could claim that, for example, I know that there are still scientists claiming that emotions are not cognition. I mean, this is a matter of debate. I mean, I think that not just to mention Antonio Damasio, but also other scientists, I mean, one could claim that emotions are definitely part of cognition, but still there are people who claim that emotions should not be considered a part of cognition. So I think that just to finish my response, that part of what you say will depend also on specific empirical research. So you might be right that in the future, some of the activities you mentioned will not be ascribed to cognition. I'm fine with that. At the moment, I think that there are good reasons to think that this kind of activity are part of cognition. If you, for example, open to non-representational accounts of cognition. But of course, I mean, the debate is still on, so I don't want to say this is the right view. Thank you very much.
May I just ask a second?
Yeah.
I have a question about the causality issue you're discussing. Okay. And here again, I don't see the issue, because you know what you're discussing is how to define causality of the microbiota on the on the host, because it's complex. In the end, you know, whatever you study, I'm an immunologist. And when you study immunology and probably any system in the body, these are utterly complex, composed of, let's say, billions of cells, 100 millions of cells. So the ecology of immune cells is not less complex than the ecology of microbiota. And nevertheless, causality are inferred by methods which are extremely classical. That is, gain of function or loss of function. And that's exactly what people do now with the microbiota. They manipulate the microbiota by gain of function and loss of function to ascribe causality. So I don't see why you invoke new methods in ascribing causalities.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting. Again, I should specify, I don't mean that these new methods should replace the old ones. I think that for certain kind of manipulation, for example, when you have a fecal transplantation, or if you want really to manipulate, let's say, microbial populations, for example, their balance, this might require new methodologies taken from ecology. But I'm not suggesting that, let's say, the traditional accounts developed in molecular biology, for example, should be abandoned. My point is, are we sure that these methods will exhaust everything we have to say about causality when we have these kind of issues? And my impression, also talking with ecologists, is that these might offer an additional view, an additional resources to the study of this phenomena. But again, so it's like, I mean, you mentioned the traditional methods. I mean, also in ecology, you can restrict the area of investigation and focus on certain elements and reduce the elements of perturbation and so on. But then there are people interested in trying to, let's say, avoid this kind of reduction and see if nevertheless it's possible to say something. Of course, it's a challenge.
No, but you're talking reductionism. That is just one method, and that is not the way, for example, many experiments are done in vivo in immunology. You don't reduce, you just remove one component of the whole. And ecologists do the same. You remove an animal and you see the effect on the ecosystem. So no, reductionism is not the Pandora of causality establishment.
Yes, but still, I don't think that this, adding and remove, so this kind of manipulation will be enough. But I will be happy to discuss with you further if you
of course
agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gérard and Federico. That was very interesting. We have next a question by Javier.
Thank you, Federico. I really love the talk, and my question is also on causality, but I'm gonna frame it like, so I agree with your intuition that the interventionist things do not work, but I think that's because—
Let's say always, I mean, not always. I don't wanna say they do not work.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Not always, because it's limited. And one of the things like that in other parts, like physiology, that we see why it doesn't work is because of the resilience. So the possibility of the microbiome, that when you remove one component, others you only add and create the same function. My question is whether there is some research on the relation between microbiome and cognition that shows something similar, like this phenomenon.
Well, I mean, I don't recall exactly, but maybe I can send you some stuff. I remember that, for example, some people focused on, for example, specific metabolites produced by certain strain of bacteria having a possible impact on cognitive functions. The idea is, should we say that these bacteria are strictly required, or, I mean, the important again is what they produce, and if this function can be replaced by, I don't know, other strains or a different composition of the same strains. So I think that at the moment,
Federico, I think we lost you. At least I lost you. Federico, you're here?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's okay now.
Sorry, I mean, many research, can you hear me? Yes, okay. Many research is somehow still too much. And so the idea that once you know a strand or a population, then everything gets done. And so again, we have, let's say, a clash, which doesn't mean, doesn't have to be, you know, an oppositive clash, but a clash between classification and ecology. So it's like more or less, Javier, do you remember the famous paper by John Dupré in defense of classification, when he claims, about species, that basically you have a different epistemic agenda between taxonomists and evolutionary biologists in defining what is a species, and maybe a universal account, might run the risk of losing the peculiarities of each field. I would envisage something similar here. I don't know if I answered to your question.
I totally agree, yes. Thanks.
Okay, we have time for one final question by Jonathan Shaw.
Thanks. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Great. Good. So this kind of goes a little bit in line with Thomas' question earlier, and it's just that kind of focusing on the issue of holism, or the kind of view of functional integration that you're looking at within this account. I guess my concern would be, given that we do have some both philosophical and empirical reasons to question the kind of unity and the holism involved when you take this kind of holobiont perspective, I mean, how much do you really need to hold on to this view in order to maintain your more general account about this kind of relation between the gut and the brain?
Thank you. So, of course, I mean, other people claim that, for example, just focusing on the gut, so removing the microbiota part, I mean, the gut is part of your body. So again, some people in the embedded mind position claim that, for example, just the gut will be enough. To me, the fascinating thing is that if you keep, let's say, a traditional symbiotic view in which you have the host and the microbiota as related but separated, then you still face some of the problems of the traditional external cognition of count, so that you extend your cognitive functions to something which is not, let's say, part of you, like the phone, even if it lives in a strong connection with you, evolve with you, and blah, blah, blah. So I think that the holobiont, maybe it's not necessary in this sense, but it helps a lot, assuming this perspective, in having a sort of extension which seems more plausible, not just in theoretical terms, but also in biological terms. So I agree that if we really want to be analytical, one could also try to develop an argument without using the holobiont perspective. But I'm very sympathetic with the holobiont perspective, because if you assume the holobiont perspective, many of the objections that are on the external extended cognition will disappear somehow. And of course, I mean, the acceptance of the holobiont perspective, of course, it's a matter of debate. But I think that we have good reason to have it. I mean, I know there are people that are not sympathetic with the holobiont, which is fine. That's why I presented my argument as an hypothesis. So let's say that all the premises I try to persuade you of hold, then if that is the case, then I think we must accept that the microbiota is a legitimate part of us and then an extension of our cognitive function. But of course, I mean, on the premises, we can debate. Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for this exchange. Before closing, I would like to say that, so I found back the dates of the next meeting. So sorry, I was a little bit vague before. So Antoine Dussault will talk at this very series of seminars on November 27, and on December 15, we'll have Jim Tabery from Utah. And the talk is super exciting. The title is personalized medicine wasn't personal, precision medicine isn't precise. So I think it's pretty exciting and not completely unrelated with some of the topics we talked about
sorry,
today.
is this 15th of December?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So all the information, of course, is on the website, but I just wanted to clarify this because I was vague, because I had forgotten the exact dates when we started this meeting. So with this, it's time to thank you, Federico. That was great. Great talk, great exchange. So thank you very much. And thank you for the people who attended. That was a big crowd of 53 people. So that was a lot. So thank you very much, Federico.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all. Thanks to
Bye.
all. Bye-bye.